Hi, I'm Patrick Johnson, and this is Behind the Screen, where I take you behind the DM screen in my campaign, The Five Kingdoms. Now, usually when I start a campaign, it starts off with a cool map, or as I've gotten older and older, more and more often it starts off with some cool idea that I have. And this one was no different. I may have been working on a map, I don't remember for sure, but I know that the main gist of the reason why I started this campaign was because of the idea that I had. My beginning concept, even before I had the map completely drawn up, was that each night, each player would have dreams. And in those dreams, they would live the lives of another character, or possibly several characters each night. And at least unbeknownst to them at the beginning, those characters were all friends of yet another player character at the table. So we have 5 players, and they're in 4 different locations. So you have 2 players in one location and 1 in 3 other locations. And in each of those locations, their friends, when it's an important day or important happening, are actually being run by the other players at the table who are dreaming that they are these people. Now, I knew this was going to be confusing for the players, and I was trying to think of different ways I could mitigate that. But it was, to me, it was a kind of a big experiment in DMing a campaign like this, and I really wanted to see how it would work out. And the group that I was running it for are all friends of mine. I knew if it was a bomb, we could just start something else. Yeah, so it was an experiment because each night or each part of the session, there really only would be 1, maybe 2 players who were actually playing their real character, and everybody else at the table would be playing someone that was one of their friends, someone that I had rolled up, and that they were just playing for the night. So each session on each adventure, there might be 1, possibly 2 players who are actually playing the characters that they rolled up, their actual characters. Everybody else would be playing their friends, characters that I had rolled up, that they didn't have any choice in what they were, didn't get to roll their stats. So I wasn't sure how the players would react to that. Would they enjoy it or wouldn't they enjoy it? So one of the things that I did to make that still enjoyable for them is, and it made logical sense to me too, was I allowed them, when they were playing one of these other characters that they didn't roll up, I allowed them to keep their skill set from their original character. So in other words, if they were a sorcerer, but they were playing a fighter that was a friend of this other person, they would still have their sorcerer abilities, their spells, and whatnot. And this made sense to me because all their mental capabilities actually came over into the character that they were playing in their dreams. So it made sense that they could have access to that. And then I justified them having access to the character, the NPC that they were playing, have access to their skill sets by the fact that if they just relaxed their mind, they could remember everything that this character had done before, and therefore would have access to their skills and whatnot. So they ended up, while they're playing other characters, they have 2 skill sets. Sometimes the skill sets overlap. I did try and keep wizards playing other wizards in their other areas, and so on and so forth, fighters playing fighters, and so on. So they would have 2 skill sets. The player who's playing their actual character only has 1 skill set, and it would go on like that. And I really wanted to see how this was going to turn out. And the reason why they're having these dreams is because of a spell that was cast by the High Priestess of the Elves. And she cast this spell because of some information that she had run across hundreds of years ago about what was going to happen in this time frame. And she knew by finding that information that the elves could not do anything about it. They ran different permutations, and whenever the elves involved themselves, things got worse. It went downhill quicker, it was worse afterwards, whatever the case may be, depending on what they did. And they realized pretty quickly that the elves could not get involved. So the High Priestess of the Elves came up with this plan, and she ran some possibilities through their spells to see what would happen. And it turns out this plan created a wild card that would possibly allow them to get by this tragic event that was coming up. And the wild card are the player characters, basically, and the player characters and this spell that allows them to dream that they're friends of the other player characters in all these different cities. Which, of course, if you think about it, is going to allow them to put 2 and 2 together faster. They're going to be in 4 different places, and they'll be able to compare notes with each other once they figure out what's going on. So that's how I started the campaign. That was my big idea, and then, of course, I went to making a map and started to fill in the other pieces of the puzzle. So, as you can see, my opening idea for the campaign, The Five Kingdoms, didn't even really have a plot line. It was just a concept, just an experiment I wanted to try. So I started thinking about plot lines. I started putting together a map. And I should tell you, when I think about plot lines, we all know D&D is predominantly about good versus evil. At least most campaigns are good versus evil. And mine are no exception. A lot of times I like to run a good versus evil campaign. But my viewpoint of good versus evil is probably not as black and white as most people. And I liken it back to a movie that I like, that I watched way back in the day called Perfect World, with Clint Eastwood directed. Kevin Costner played it. I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favorite movie. I like it a lot. It's not my favorite movie, but the concept in it of good versus evil is right down the alley the way I think about it. Everything is in shades of gray. Good people do bad things, bad people do good things. And a lot of times it's about the reasons and the ways they go about accomplishing their goals that determines whether they're good or evil, not necessarily whether their goals are correct or the right thing to do. And so all this was going through my mind as I decided to come up with the plot line. So what I came up with was that the god Vulcan had been stirring this viscous liquid with his staff while he was trying to form the multiverse. And he waited until it was just the right hardness, not quite hardened all the way, and then he cracked it with his staff. And it created these patterns and striations and cracks that run through this obsidian crystal that basically creates and determines exactly what the multiverse is like around the Five Kingdoms, or that the Five Kingdoms is in. And at some point in time in the past, approximately 1,500 years ago, the High Priestess of the Elves decided that it was a good idea to crack 2 pieces off of this obsidian crystal, the crystal that determined the shape and makeup of the world, the crystal that created the world. She cracked 2 pieces off of it and hid them in other places that you can't quite get to any normal means from the Five Kingdoms. And her idea was that breaking off these 2 pieces of the crystal would create a world that was more at peace, less strife. There were way too many sentient demi-humans in the world, all fighting for territory, all advancing their technologies, both magical and science, and coming into clashes with each other constantly. And it seemed like it was headed towards a big problem. She decided that the best way to get rid of that was to crack off the 2 parts of the crystal that were pushing forward technology and magic. Now, the players don't know exactly all of this, even though we're on session 10. They do know that 2 pieces of the crystal have been cracked off. And they have some idea of the storylines, a couple different opposing storylines of why. But they don't know the real reason why. Of course, I'm telling them the different viewpoints of the High Priestess and then the main evil character in the storyline, which is Prince Larkin. And I'll get to him in a little bit. So that's the main concepts. So that crystal is down in the dungeon below the Crystal City, or I should say the Castle Obsidian, which is in the Crystal City. And that is what controls the makeup of the world. Those 2 pieces have been lost, and the main antagonist, Prince Larkin, has heard about them, and he has an idea of where he can find one and how to get it. And that is the beginnings of the story.